Hi everyone, welcome to my Google Slides gallery. This is a little map tour that I put together. So this is a gallery that I created, and I chose these 5 art movements because I think that they are the most important for the best foundation of art history. So I have 2 goals for this video. My first goal is that you will have a very basic foundation of art history after it's done, and my second goal is that you'll understand that art has developed and progressed over time. So I have here that you should go to the visitor center first, and that's just for if you want to click through the presentation after you watch the video, you can go here to get some helpful hints about clicking through the presentation, assignment information, or just back to the map. So I'm going to go in order here of the art movements based on when they happened in time, and kind of explains how each one influences the next. So the first one is the Greek and Roman period. So Greek and Roman art was not the first art that was ever created, but this is the one that I started with because this is the first time that we see really good representational art, which means that it looks realistic. They had a style called the classical style, and that just means that mainly in the figures, everything was realistic as far as their proportions, their faces, their musculature, everything is realistic, and that's kind of what is known as the classical style. A lot of the artists weren't known in this period because they didn't really document those kind of things. I'm mainly going to focus on Greek and Roman sculpture. So sculptures were carved from blocks of marble, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, that they started with just a big block and then kind of carved with their tools from there. This sculpture here in the picture, surprisingly, we do know the artist's name for this one. This one was carved by Polykleitos, and this sculpture is called Spear Bearer, and this is actually really important because a lot of the artists in the future based their proportions off of this sculpture that he made. And so when we think of the classical style in Greece and Rome, this is the sculpture that usually comes to mind because here we see like natural facial features, natural musculature, body proportions are all realistic, and he's standing in a stance that we refer to as contrapposto, which just means that he looks real and it looks like his body is actually like holding weight. If you see kind of from my chart down here, sculpture was definitely most important, and then paintings, and then other stuff like architecture. Focusing on sculpture a little bit more, we have a triumphal arch here, and triumphal arches were really important because the emperors in ancient Rome often wanted to celebrate their military victories, and this is how they did it. They built a ginormous arch, and so if you could kind of see like a person would only stand probably up to like this first level here. So it's ginormous, and it would just celebrate the military victories, and it was kind of like propaganda that you should kind of fear the emperor. So military victories and some realistic sculptures are basically what Greece and Rome are all about. After that period comes the medieval period. Medieval art happened after the fall of Rome, about the 6th century. Christianity was legal now, and so we start to see a lot of manuscripts, which are handmade books, and a lot of churches being built that were illegal beforehand. So as far as manuscript pages go, these are 2 examples here, and manuscripts were often, they were handmade books, often made in books of the Bible. So looking at these images, they're like really different than what we just saw with Greek and Roman art. They don't really look realistic, especially this figure right here. And that's on purpose. In the medieval period, they very well probably knew how to make realistic imagery, and they chose not to. They chose to make stuff that looked like this because they thought that they wanted to make their art look like it didn't belong in this world, and they thought that by doing that it would connect it to the divine world and make it look a little bit more holy. And so I think it's important to look at these and to see what people in the medieval times considered not of this world, which would be stylized or non-realistic figures and a lot of like patterning and really intricate designs. So the other thing we see in the medieval period is churches, which we did not see in the Greek and Roman period, and mosaics in those churches. And so this picture here is the front of a church that is all mosaic. And again, there's like figures that are more stylized or not realistic for the same purpose. They wanted it to look more like it was of the divine world. And that is a lot of what was happening during the medieval period. So next comes the Renaissance. At the end of the medieval period was what is the Dark Ages, and that was when a lot of people died and a lot of art was destroyed. And so the Renaissance, they decided that they wanted to have a rebirth of the European culture and a revival of that classical style. So this is a little bit different from the Greek and Roman period because this extended to all aspects of their culture, art, music, literature, and more. And a huge art progression was that they were able to create a sense of space and a sense of depth in their paintings. And paintings were definitely the most popular thing during this period. The four most well-known Renaissance artists, Raphael, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Leonardo da Vinci, otherwise known as the Ninja Turtles. These four guys right here, when you think of a Renaissance painting, what probably comes to mind is something that they painted. Some examples, the Mona Lisa, School of Athens, The Last Supper, and this is Girl with a Pearl Earring. That's actually by Vermeer, but it's a really popular Renaissance painting. I included these because I wanted to show in these landscapes, or landscape-esque, more specifically, how they created this sense of space. So in this School of Athens up top here, you can see the progression of these arches going into space, how the walls look like they're going back into space. This arch looks like it's in the foreground. Same down here. The ceiling, you can kind of tell it's going back in space. These doors on the side of the wall here, the windows, the horizon line in the background. And so this is basically what you see during the Renaissance. A lot of realistic paintings and a lot of landscapes. And this is an example of what a landscape looks like. And it was super realistic. You look like you could just jump right into the scene, which is really important when we get to the next period, which is Impressionism. So there were a couple periods in between the Renaissance very similar to that style, but Impressionism is where we see the big change because in the 1890s, photography actually becomes popular. And so artists were saying, okay, if a photograph can make a realistic image, then why do I want to paint a realistic image? Like, photography can do that, I want to do something different. So Impressionism focused on capturing a passing moment in time rather than a realistic image. And so really revolutionary things that happened were stuff like you can see the paint on the canvas now. You can see the artist's brushstroke. It looks kind of fast and a little bit messy. And that's because they were all about just these moments in time and focusing on the painting rather than a photograph. So Claude Monet, he painted a lot of these landscapes, and we can see like these two landscapes down here look totally different than the Renaissance one that we just looked at. So this is all about that passing moment in time. I mean, it looks like this is just a wave or just on the water. The sunset, when you think about a sunset and how fast it goes by, that's kind of exactly what he was trying to capture in these paintings. And it was super revolutionary for this time. And a lot of the art critics said that Monet and other Impressionist painters had no talent and that they were kind of dumb for painting like this. When we look back at it now, it was totally revolutionary and really a progressive step in the art world, but everyone was so fixated on the Renaissance, and now that we know how to paint things realistically, we should do that all the time. And so that's why this movement at the time was pretty hated. This is a cool video on Impressionism if you get a chance to look at it. So lastly, we're going to look at pop art. So Impressionism kind of started this movement of art being different and being not the Renaissance and being not realistic kind of paintings. And so when we get into modern art and contemporary art, which pop art falls into, there's just a lot of different stuff. I mean, this is really when art, like strange art things that you would think of and associate with that, really start to come out during this time. I like to focus on pop art because I think it's still realistic and still kind of relatable. So this was in the 1950s, and the main focus was drawing attention to consumerism through art. So Roy Lichtenstein, he was one of the one of the artists that really did this. His style, this is one of his more famous works, Wham! His style looks like the title slide and like this one, he would create images that looked like they were printed in a newspaper. And that was kind of drawing attention to consumer culture and the fact that he thought society was becoming too accustomed to seeing things in the news, to seeing bad things in the news, that it was becoming too much of a way of life to see bad things happening. And so he was kind of talking about that in his art. And so a characteristic of his work is that he uses what are called Ben-Day dots. That's because when newspapers used to be printed, they wouldn't print solid blocks of color. It would be little dots of color. So he mimics that in his paintings to give it that newspaper feel, to emphasize that consumer culture. So Andy Warhol was another famous pop artist, and his work, Marilyn Monroe, and then all of his soup can works. Again, that is more about the consumer culture, especially the soup, just things that were everyday that people didn't realize were everyday. He was just kind of drawing attention to the fact that America had become such a consumer world, that people were so invested in the stuff that they could buy and in famous people, that he kind of wanted to bring the attention to that. And so pop art kind of started this movement that really took off and really emphasized that artists could do anything and artists could make anything. So like I said, if you want to click back through this presentation or watch any of the videos, you can go to the Visitor Center and get some information about that. But I hope that you kind of have a basis of art history and that you kind of see how art has progressed over time.